The human mind is a vast universe filled with unknown landscapes, hidden shadows, and forces that guide us without us even knowing. We spend our lives searching for answers outside ourselves, waiting for someone else to tell us what to do, how to feel, how to heal. But what if the real answer was inside us all along? Carl Jung, the great explorer of the unconscious, left us a clear message: you cannot truly heal if you don't make yourself your own priority. But what does this really mean? How can we apply it in our lives? From the moment we're born, we're taught to look outward. Society tells us we must be good children, good friends, good workers. We're educated to please others, to fit in, to not be selfish. But somewhere along the way, we forget something essential: you cannot give what you don't have. You cannot offer love if you don't love yourself. You cannot bring peace if there's chaos within you. You cannot accompany others if you don't even know who you are. Jung dedicated his life to exploring the human psyche and discovered that within each person there are hidden forces, universal archetypes that govern our thoughts and emotions. One of the most important concepts he developed was that of the shadow, that part of ourselves that we repress, deny, and hide from the world. Why do we do this? Because we were taught that certain emotions are unacceptable, that anger is bad, that pain is weakness, that sadness is something to flee from. But Jung warns us, what you deny subjugates you, what you accept transforms you. So when we talk about prioritizing ourselves to heal, we're not talking about superficial acts of self-care. It's not just about taking a day off, exercising, or eating healthy. We're talking about something much deeper, a radical commitment to our own truth without fear, without masks, without seeking validation from others. It's about confronting our shadow, looking at what hurts, what makes us uncomfortable, what frightens us. And here comes the great paradox: when you dare to look at yourself without filters, without judgments, without escaping, that's when you begin to heal. But it's not easy. We live in a world that constantly distracts us, bombards us with information, expectations, comparisons. We disconnect from ourselves to fit in, to be accepted. And when we finally try to reconnect, we find a terrifying silence, a void we prefer to avoid. But this void is not your enemy. This void is the space where your true self begins. Prioritizing yourself to heal doesn't mean ignoring others or becoming insensitive or indifferent. It means you stop expecting the world to save you and take responsibility for your own healing. It means you listen to yourself, give yourself permission to feel without guilt, establish boundaries without fear, dare to be who you really are without apologizing. Jung said that the journey of individuation, the process of becoming who you really are, is not an easy or quick path. It's a process that involves pain, doubts, crises. But it's also the path that leads you to fulfillment. Because when you allow yourself to be who you are without denying any part of yourself, without hiding your shadow, without fleeing from your emotions, you discover something incredible. True healing isn't about eliminating your pain, but integrating it. And in that integration, in that act of embracing yourself completely, you find something more valuable than any external validation: the freedom to be authentic. Deep in our psyche, beyond reason and logic, there's a hidden world full of symbols, patterns, and invisible forces that shape our lives without us even realizing it. Jung understood that to truly heal, it's not enough to change habits or adopt positive thoughts. It's about a journey to the very core of our existence, where we face the lost fragments of our identity. This journey isn't just a philosophical or intellectual exploration, but a deeply emotional and visceral process. It forces us to look at the wounds we've carried since childhood, those that were buried under layers of social conditioning, unresolved traumas, and others' expectations. It forces us to confront the voices in our minds that tell us we're not enough, that we don't deserve love, that we'll never be truly free. And here's where the concept of archetypes comes in, one of Jung's most important contributions to psychology. Archetypes are universal patterns that exist in the collective unconscious, primordial images that have guided humanity since immemorial times. They're present in myths, stories, dreams. They speak to us in symbols, metaphors, intuitions that we feel but don't always understand. One of these archetypes is the hero, who represents the struggle for self-improvement, the need to go through trials to find our true power. But for the hero to be born, they must first descend into darkness, face their deepest fears, confront their own shadow. In simpler terms, this means that to heal, we cannot avoid pain. We cannot run from what torments us. We must go through it, feel it, understand it, and only then can we transcend it. The problem is that most people fear this process. They prefer the comfort of the known, even if it means living in suffering, in constant dissatisfaction. They cling to toxic relationships, jobs that destroy them, habits that consume them, simply because change seems terrifying. Jung said that what we don't make conscious manifests in our lives as destiny. This means that if we don't face our internal conflicts, they'll find ways to manifest in our external reality, whether in patterns of destructive relationships, illnesses, existential crises, or a permanent sense of emptiness. This is where personal prioritization becomes fundamental, not as a selfish act, but as an unwavering commitment to our own growth. True healing begins when we stop blaming the world for our suffering and start looking within ourselves with courage. What patterns are we repeating? What wounds are we ignoring? What emotions are we suppressing? Healing is not a linear process. There will be times when we feel we've advanced and others when it seems we've regressed. But Jung taught us that everything has a purpose in our development, even crises, even suffering, especially suffering, because in it we find the keys to our transformation. Many people seek answers externally, in books, teachers, religions, ideologies. And while all this can offer guidance and support, the only truth that truly frees us is the one we discover within ourselves. Jung called this the process of individuation, the search for our purest, most real, most complete identity. And this process is only possible when we give ourselves permission to be who we really are, without fear, without shame, without the need to fit into molds imposed by others. But this comes at a cost. Not everyone will understand your path. When you begin to prioritize, when you stop acting according to others' expectations and start listening to your inner voice, you may face rejection, misunderstanding, loneliness. But this is also the price of authenticity. And what you gain in return is infinitely more valuable, a deep connection with yourself, a life lived from truth, a freedom that cannot be taken away by anyone. The unconscious is an ocean full of mysteries, hidden messages, fragments of our essence waiting to be discovered. Jung left us a map, but the journey is personal, and the only way to travel it is by making the decision to prioritize ourselves, to look inward, to face ourselves honestly and fearlessly. The emotions we carry within us are like echoes of past experiences, some clear, others so buried in our memory that we don't even know they exist. They affect us in our way of thinking, in our relationships, in the way we perceive the world. Jung understood that within us dwell forces that operate beyond our consciousness, energies that shape our destiny even when we believe we're in control. One of the most fascinating concepts in his work is that of anima and animus. These figures represent the feminine and masculine energies that exist in each person regardless of their gender. These aren't superficial characteristics, but deep aspects of our psyche that influence our way of loving, creating, relating. The anima, the feminine part in a man's unconscious, manifests in his emotions, his capacity for connection, his intuition. The animus, the masculine part in a woman's unconscious, expresses itself through logic, action, and structure. Jung discovered that when these forces are out of balance, we experience internal conflicts that reflect in our external reality. For example, a person with a repressed anima may feel disconnected from their emotions, unable to express vulnerability, trapped in an extreme rationality that isolates them from others. On the other hand, an uncontrolled animus can manifest as a chaotic mind, trapped in rigid thoughts, in a constant internal struggle between what one feels and what one thinks one should do. Emotional healing involves integrating these forces, finding a balance between reason and emotion, between action and introspection. This process doesn't happen overnight. Jung spoke about the importance of symbols and myths in our internal transformation. Myths aren't just ancient stories but reflections of deep psychological truths. Each of us lives our own personal myth, an unconscious narrative that guides our decisions and expectations. Some live the story of the savior, feeling their purpose in life is to rescue others, even at their own expense. Others are trapped in the myth of the martyr, believing they must suffer to deserve love or recognition. And many are immersed in the narrative of the prisoner, convinced that external circumstances are a cage from which they can never escape. But here's the key point: when we become aware of the story we're living, we can rewrite it. We can choose to stop being victims of destiny and become creators of our own lives. Jung believed the unconscious isn't just formed by wounds and traumas, but also by infinite potential, by a creative power waiting to be awakened. The problem is that often this potential is blocked by thought patterns we've absorbed since childhood. Ideas like, "I'm not good enough," "love always hurts," "life is a constant struggle," settle in our minds and become self-fulfilling prophecies. We define ourselves through limiting beliefs without realizing we have the power to question and change them. But to do so, we must first recognize them. This brings us to another essential point: the importance of introspection. We live in a world where distraction is the norm, where there's always something to occupy our minds so we don't have to face ourselves: social media, work, constant entertainment, all designed to keep us focused externally and away from our interior. But true healing only occurs in stillness, in those moments when we dare to be alone with our thoughts, without filters, without excuses. Jung used the technique of active imagination to communicate with his unconscious. Instead of ignoring thoughts and emotions that emerged, he explored them consciously, allowing them to manifest as images, voices, sensations. He didn't repress or judge them, he observed them, listened to them, dialogued with them. He discovered that within each emotion, even the most painful, there's a message, a truth waiting to be understood. When we prioritize ourselves, when we give ourselves the space to explore our inner world, we begin to realize how much of our life has been controlled by invisible forces. We realize that many of our choices haven't really been ours, but the result of others' expectations, inherited fears, mental programs we've accepted without questioning. The question is, what happens when we finally take control? When we decide our life won't be defined by the past, by pain, by what others expect from us. The change isn't immediate, but it's inevitable. When a person begins to act from their authenticity, when they stop betraying themselves to please others, everything around them begins to transform. Some relationships disappear because they no longer resonate with the new version of oneself. Others strengthen because they're now based on truth rather than need. Opportunities that seemed impossible begin to manifest because we've stopped self-sabotaging. But all this is only possible if we have the courage to prioritize ourselves, to make our healing a real priority and not just an abstract idea. Because in the end, no one will come to rescue us. There are no saviors, no external answers that can fill the internal void. The only person who can do this work is you yourself. The idea of prioritizing yourself to heal emotionally may seem simple in theory, but in practice, it's an act of profound courage. It's not just a matter of superficial self-care, taking a break, or giving yourself little treats. It's a radical commitment to personal truth, to authenticity, to recognizing what we really need to evolve. Jung understood that emotional healing isn't a linear process but a series of internal deaths and rebirths, a spiral journey into the deepest corners of the soul. One of the biggest obstacles in this process is fear, fear of the unknown, fear of change, fear of what we'll find when we stop distracting ourselves with the noise of the outside world. We've been taught to fear our own shadows, to see them as something that must be eradicated rather than understood. But Jung made it clear that ignoring the shadow doesn't make it disappear. On the contrary, it turns it into an autonomous force that influences our life from the shadows, guiding our actions without us realizing it. The shadow isn't just the dark side of our personality, but also the home of everything we've repressed, of all the parts of ourselves we've denied to fit in, to be accepted, to avoid pain. There lie our hidden desires, our unexpressed anger, our forbidden passions, our talents we never allowed ourselves to develop. And the only way to integrate these parts isn't by rejecting them, but by dialoguing with them, understanding them, giving them a place in our psyche. This is where the notion of the self comes into play, the central concept in Jung's psychology. The self isn't just the ego, it's not the image we project to the world or the set of roles we play in society. It's something much deeper. It's the totality of our psychic existence, the union of consciousness and the unconscious, the point at which we achieve an internal harmony where we're no longer divided into fragments, masks, contradictions that tear us apart inside. To reach this point, it's necessary to go through a phase that Jung described as the confrontation with the shadow. This is an uncomfortable process because it forces us to see things we prefer to ignore. It shows us our weaknesses, our deepest fears, our insecurities. But it also reveals our true potential, what we could be if we dared to embrace our totality. However, most people avoid this confrontation. They prefer to stay in a comfort zone, even if that zone is full of suffering, because at least it's familiar. They prefer to cling to an identity that feels comfortable, even if that identity is a cage. They identify with their wounds, with their traumas, with their limitations, and in that attachment to the old, they deny themselves the possibility of transformation. Jung understood that true healing doesn't occur when we eliminate suffering from our life, but when we understand it, when we turn it into wisdom, when we use it as fuel for our evolution. It's not about denying pain, but learning to listen to it, to see what message it brings us, what part of ourselves is asking for attention. And at this point, an essential question arises: how do we start this process? How do we stop being prisoners of our wounds and start truly prioritizing ourselves? The answer isn't simple or universal, because each person has a different path. But there's something that's true for everyone: the first step is always awareness. We cannot change what we don't recognize. We cannot heal what we refuse to see. Healing begins with honesty, with the courage to look in the mirror without filters, without excuses, without masks. This involves questioning our most ingrained beliefs, challenging the stories we've told ourselves about who we are and what's possible for us. It involves stopping looking externally and starting to listen to our own inner voice. It involves stopping betraying ourselves to please others, stopping postponing our happiness out of fear of what others will say. When we prioritize ourselves, we begin to notice things that previously went unnoticed. We begin to realize how we talk to ourselves, how we treat ourselves, how much we allow ourselves to feel, express, create. We begin to see that many of our emotions aren't ours, but the result of external conditioning, inherited wounds, unconscious patterns that have been in our family for generations. And here comes another of Jung's great revelations: the collective unconscious. We aren't just isolated individuals, but parts of a larger whole. Our emotions, our fears, our beliefs are connected to something much broader than our personal experience. Many of our wounds don't come just from our individual history, but from the history of our family, our culture, our society. Healing, then, isn't just an individual act, but an act of collective transformation. When a person dares to break a pattern, to question a belief, to free themselves from a trauma, they're generating a change that transcends their own life. They're opening a path for others to do so as well. They're demonstrating with their own existence that there's another way to live, to feel, to be. This is the power of prioritizing yourself. It's not selfishness, it's not indifference towards others. It's quite the opposite, it's the most generous act we can do. Because only when we're in balance can we truly contribute something to the world. Only when we heal ourselves can we stop projecting our pain onto others, stop repeating stories of suffering, stop perpetuating destructive dynamics. And yet, the fear persists: fear of letting go of the old, fear of what will happen when we dare to live from our truth. But Jung made it clear that fear isn't a sign that we should stop, it's a sign that we're on the threshold of change. It's proof that we're leaving the mental prison in which we've lived and entering unknown territory where everything is possible. Are we willing to take the next step? To look within ourselves without fear, without judgment, without excuses? Because in the end, healing isn't something that happens at a specific moment, in a determined place. It's a continuous journey, a process in which each day we choose to be a little more ourselves, a little freer, a little more conscious. And it all begins when we decide, once and for all, that our life belongs to us.